I want you to imagine for a moment a community center where every Saturday night you have children between the ages of 9 and around 15 years old congregating in one space. They have snacks, they have a dance hall, they have little areas where you can hang out, and they have a variety of different sports, including but not limited to association football, otherwise known as soccer. Now, I want you to imagine an 11-year-old Jordan Green walking through this soccer field, which in all actuality is just a basketball court where they're playing soccer, and catching a soccer ball directly to the rib cage. Let me tell you something. That soccer ball put me out of commission for around 10 to 15 minutes. Knocked the wind out of me. I immediately went and sat down and I had to hold back my tears. I don't know how fast that soccer ball was traveling when it hit me, but it felt like a rocket. Okay, that girl kicked super hard. And that was the last time I ever tried playing soccer in my whole entire life. That said, as I've traveled around the world, and by the world, I mean a few countries in Western Europe and a few countries in Southeast Asia, I've come to realize that soccer is indeed the world's most popular sport. It's one thing to hear about this. It's another thing to actually go to different places with different cultural customs and see people of all different ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds playing the same sport. Bearing that in mind, if I want to globalize my mind, so to speak, I'm going to have to learn to, at the very least, appreciate and understand the sport that the world loves. That said, in this video, I will be reacting to European soccer explained for Americans.
So I've been wanting to start following soccer for a while now, but as an American, I always found it complicated. Not like how they play. Most 3-year-olds can kind of understand more or less how it works. I just mean how everything kind of works in Europe. You know, I would follow the World Cup, and I'd root for the United States if they made it. And then I'd root for Iceland because clearly they've all been practicing that clapping, and they're really good at it. But that only happens once every 4 years. So I turn on my TV, and it would be like a random game, like Parma versus Bologna. And first I'd make sure that I wasn't watching the Food Network, but then I had no frame of reference for this game. Like, are these teams good? You know, is this a big game? Which one of these guys is Pele? You know, I didn't know. And I had all these other questions, like, you know, why are teams getting kicked out of leagues? Why are they all rolling around on the ground so much? How are guys getting traded to different countries? And why does everybody in the stands have a scarf? So a few months ago, I tried to start figuring it all out, and I started watching some matches. That's the first thing. They aren't soccer games. They are football matches. And I bought FIFA for my Xbox, and I bought a scarf and a vuvuzela because that's like the rules or something.
So for context, I haven't really watched a whole lot of association football throughout my life. I did try playing it at recess in 5th grade, and I was pretty good at it because I was just faster than everyone else. So I would just kick the ball, outrun everyone, and then score the goal. Then I got to 6th grade, and we were playing it in PE, and this kid who had come from another elementary school, his name was Josue, he absolutely mixed me, and he killed any dreams or hopes that I had of pursuing anything to do with soccer at all. That man was putting the ball through my legs, going around me, mixing me up, making me turn around. I was like, I'm not built for this.
So anyway, this is all the info that I wish I'd known a year ago. This is my crash course of translating soccer into American. I'm going to assume that you kind of know the rules. The biggest difference between American sports is how offsides works and the clock. Lots of people get upset about the clock. It goes up instead of down. Get over yourself. It doesn't really matter. Americans also get mad because the clock doesn't stop and games pretty much end whenever the ref feels like it.
Okay, so I have a friend who played pretty high-level soccer. I think he got to, I want to say D2 or maybe even D1. I don't really know. Bryce, if you're watching this, comment below what level you got to. But basically, he played college soccer, and he was telling me that the ref can pretty much just stop the game whenever they want after the 90-minute mark. And I still struggle to comprehend that because I'm a really big basketball fan. And believe me when I tell you that basketball fans already despise the referees. The referees can do no right in the eyes of basketball fans. So I can only imagine what this kind of rule does to soccer fans psychologically. I can just imagine if you're watching a big match with your favorite team and the ref just ends the game before you even get the opportunity to score or whatever. I would be pissed. I would probably take an extended break from watching soccer, but I guess people are okay with it. Let me know in the comments what you think of that rule.
You actually adjusted this pretty quickly. The game's an hour and a half long. You'll have your chances to score, and if you can't score, then it's not the clock's fault. Some people, and when I say people, I'm referring both to discussions I've had with other Americans as well as like myself 6 years ago. So people think soccer is too slow. And when Americans look at a soccer field, something in our minds, we think that it's like playing hockey or playing basketball just on a big grass field. And in those sports, guys like go full tilt a lot, like most of the game. So when two players are just standing there passing the ball back and forth, we wonder, like, why aren't they trying to move forward? Just go. And on the other side, we expect the defenders to be attacking the guy with the ball rather than just standing 5 feet back and letting him do what he's doing. The key difference is that football pitches are much.
Okay, so this is one thing that I do like about basketball specifically, is that you have a 24-hour shot clock, which basically forces people to at least attempt taking a shot. There's no real scenario where you can just sit there for the entirety of the game and pass back and forth to your teammate. Granted, I'm sure that doesn't actually happen in soccer, but theoretically it could. In basketball, it's literally impossible. So maybe that does sort of lead to that faster or perceived faster pace of play. But I don't know. I'm sure there is a good reason why this is the rule in soccer. Maybe he'll explain more.
Much larger than basketball courts and hockey rinks. And if you tried a full court press for the whole soccer game, you would be exhausted and you would probably lose.
Okay, so yeah, that pretty much explains it. I didn't know that the difference was this big. That's actually insane.
See, the pace of a soccer game is actually much closer to baseball. Most of the game is going to consist of guys just slowly passing the ball around, real peaceful. And then it's going to be all of a sudden followed by these short bursts of extremely fast action. Basketball players, it's estimated, run an average of 2.5 miles during the game.
Why did he put Monopoly in there?
Soccer players can run 7, if not 10 miles during one game. And remember, you only have 3 subs games, so most of these players will be playing the whole game. One thing Americans will appreciate is that other than halftime, there are no commercials. So it's like the anti-NFL, which is great. It also means that no matter where the ball is, both teams are always potentially about 30 seconds away from scoring.
So there aren't as many commercials, but from what I have seen, at least when looking at the jerseys, it does seem like there are a lot more advertisements, either on the jerseys or on the pitch itself or around the pitch. They're going to get their money, best believe.
Which creates this kind of constant tension. It also creates a scenario where you can't ever really run to the bathroom or get a drink. Soccer players seem to have a reputation for being lazy in the U.S. because they don't always pop right back up after going to ground and get right back into play. Certainly some players do embellish things and some go over the top, but I don't really think that on the whole it's quite the issue that people make it out to be. So they get made fun of in Europe too. So here's a fun experiment to try the next time you have a few minutes. Go to like a local field and then quickly jog laps around that field for like 10 minutes. And then suddenly sprint down the middle of the field as fast as you can. And when you're halfway up the field, while you're still sprinting, have one of your friends just shove you over onto the ground. And if you can pop right back up and keep sprinting, then you can keep complaining about those guys. A lot of the time, they're just taking a little rest. And everyone will either just keep playing around them, or both teams will be a little tired, so who cares? It's not a Matthew Riley novel out there. The other reason for guys slowly passing the ball around is that one of the strategies currently employed by most teams is to maintain possession as much as possible. Obviously, this is no different in American football or why Russia is really good at hockey. The other team can't score when you have the ball. So teams will just pass the ball back and forth and even pass it back to their own goalie because it's better to go backwards with the ball than to maybe make a risky pass and let the other team have the ball.
See, that's why I like basketball, though, because basketball is an equal opportunity sport. Again, there's no scenario in which one team can just hold the ball for the whole game, which is why you never see scores of 100-0 or 100-15. The only time you'll see something like that is maybe in high school basketball, where the level of competition between the two teams is so great that one team can literally just keep stealing the ball from the other team the whole entire game. That does happen sometimes, but at the professional level, it's impossible.
On occasion, you'll see a team make like 50 passes without the other team touching the ball, which can take a really long time, but then they'll go down and they'll score, and that's like as good as it gets. It's all about waiting for the precise moment for things to align and then all going together at the right moment. In terms of like positioning and formations, you'll usually have 3 or 4 numbers, like 4-4-2 or 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1. These numbers will always add up to 10, and then the goalie is just assumed. Different positions include the center backs, who will just stay as defenders, and then the full backs are both the left and the right back, who will defend, but then they'll also usually join the attack as well. And then we have midfielders, like a center midfielder, who can go both ways, a center attacking midfielder or a center defending midfielder. And then up front, we have like a left wing and a right wing, sometimes a center forward, and a striker up front, it's his job to just score goals.
Okay, so I'm assuming, based on everything I've heard, that Haaland, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but the guy from Norway, the blonde guy, I'm assuming that he's a striker because I've heard that that's his main thing. I don't know what Mbappe plays. I think Ronaldo was a midfielder, and I think he specialized at scoring, so I'm assuming he was the center attacking midfielder, whatever it's called. And I want to say Messi is a forward. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments.
One thing I'll mention that makes it easy to kind of get into soccer is that you can legally watch some old matches on YouTube. This is unlike American sports. Like, why isn't there a website that I can go to watch any game, like an iTunes for sports? So, like, I can pay $2 to watch any game in history. Like, all these games are on tape somewhere. They exist. But I can't watch a game in the 1986 World Series unless an international pandemic shuts down the world and there's no sports. And I just happen to put it on NBC or something.
Yeah, where do you stream football matches? Now that I think about it, I've never really thought to do that, but outside of cable TV, where would you even go to watch football? Because I know with basketball, they make it super, super complicated to catch all of the basketball games. You basically need something like 3 or 4 different streaming services if you want to watch all of the games, which is the main reason why I watch the highlights instead.
Like, come on. So anyway, so keeping the ball and attacking is referred to as positive football. You're always trying to move forward. This is what most teams do. This is what people like to watch a little more. It's kind of exciting. It's more exciting to watch that way. But of course, there's always a yin to the yang. So the yin is this guy named Jose Mourinho. And he basically says, I don't want the ball. I'm going to stand back with my players in front of my goal, and you're not going to score. And then every once in a while, when you're falling asleep and all your players are up in my zone, we're going to steal the ball and we're going to run down and score. Which sounds a little bit risky, except that it actually does work if you do it well. Jose.
Okay, so the more he explains this, the more I feel like soccer has a lot in common with boxing, actually, ironically. Because I feel like boxing is another sport where it's the constant tension and the possibility, the potential for something exciting happening that keeps you invested in the match. You can't turn your head for a second because you might miss the knockout. But then you have someone like Floyd Mayweather who isn't even necessarily going for the knockout. He's just on the defensive, and it works really well for him, but people hate him for it. So let me know if maybe I'm misconstruing that, but the more he explains it, soccer seems actually more like boxing, just without all the violence.
He's considered one of the best managers there is, and he has the trophies to back it up. He's won plenty of big tournaments with teams that I'm told if you tried to have that team keep the ball the whole time, like most coaches would, they would have been destroyed. They were too old and they just would have got worn out and wiped out. But by playing this negative defensive strategy, they were able to win. And despite this, teams that employ this strategy seem to get a bad rap for playing negative as opposed to positive football, because keeping the ball seems to be the in thing right now. So obviously there's more thought that goes into it than I've described here. Like Diego Simeone and Atletico Madrid has been using this negative strategy for years, and they've been successful with it. On the flip side, the guys who've risen to the top playing possession football are also widely sought after. Two of the most well-known coaches right now are Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola. And I highly recommend watching the series All or Nothing about Manchester City on Amazon Prime. It's about Guardiola's team a few years ago. And it's quite clear from interviews with these guys that they're quite thoughtful and well-traveled. I couldn't name a single baseball manager who can speak 3 languages. So speaking of Manchester City, they play in England. There are 4 main football countries in Europe. There's England, Spain, Germany, and Italy. England has the Premier League, Spain has La Liga, Germany has the Bundesliga, and Italy has Serie A.
Okay, so the way my friend, the friend I was talking about earlier, broke it down to me was that the Premier League has the highest level of competition overall. Let me know if you disagree with him in the comments below, and I'm sure he would love to debate you on that. But that's just what he told me, was that the Premier League from top to bottom has the best overall competition, whereas the Spanish League, and I don't really know about the Italian and German leagues, but the Spanish League is more of a farmers league, I want to say he called it, where you have maybe 2 or 3 teams, I guess Barcelona, Madrid, and Atletico Madrid, I think that's what he called it, pretty much run the league every year. And those are the only teams that will ever win anything. Let me know if my interpretation is incorrect, though, because this is all secondary source information.
So to take one country, they're all the same, but to take one country, England, the Premier League consists of 20 teams. Every team plays every other team, once at home and once away. And these leagues don't have playoffs. You get 3 points for a win, 1 for a tie. The team with the most points at the end of the season wins. And this can and has come down to the final day of the season before. In the U.S., our leagues pretty much have the same teams every year. So if you suck, and even if you start to lose on purpose, you actually get rewarded with the top draft pick the next year. If you finish in last place in one of these leagues, they literally kick you out of the league.
Okay, so this is one of the funniest things to me because I do know a little bit about relegation. I studied up on this a while back. I find it so funny that European sports have the most capitalistic principles, whereas American sports have the most socialist principles. When you think about something like relegation, the idea that the worst get weeded out and don't get rewarded for being bad, that sounds like a very capitalistic principle. Maybe I'm misinterpreting this. If you disagree with me, let me know in the comments and let me know why, because I'd really like to hear another perspective on this. But to his point, I know in basketball and football specifically, the worst team gets the best opportunity to pick the best up-and-coming players. Whereas I don't even think they have drafts in soccer. So I think generally young players just sign with the best teams that they can sign with, thus keeping those really good teams at the top position in their leagues. Hence the whole Farmers League thing. Not really much of a thing in basketball, and specifically in the NBA, they've actually passed legislation to ensure that dynasties aren't really a thing anymore.
They call it relegation because that's a nicer sounding word. Before we keep going, here's a quick aside on the MLS. Major League Soccer is the top league in the United States. It's different in many ways than the European leagues. There's no relegation, so the teams do stay the same from year to year, and there is a salary cap. Talent-wise, I guess globally speaking, it seems to be an okay league, but certainly not on par with any of the European leagues. So under the Premier League, which is at the top, under them is a league called the English Football League Championship. The 3 teams who finish at the bottom of the Premier League are relegated to the Championship for the next season and replaced by 3 teams from the Championship. The bottom 3 teams in Championship are relegated to League 1. The bottom 3 in League 1 are relegated to League 2, whose losers go to the National League, whose losers are... nobody really cares about them except their moms at this part, but you get the idea. Unless you really get into soccer, you'll never hear about anything below the Premier League again.
Okay, so again, this is so crazy to me because you see upward mobility here. This is basically what I'm seeing, is that a team in the National League, whatever that even is, I've never heard of that before, can technically go all the way up to the Premier League and win it. Granted, I'm sure the likelihood of that is slim to none, but it's possible. Whereas in basketball, for example, in the NBA, you have the G League, but G League teams cannot go to the NBA. Only G League players can go to the NBA. So completely different structure.
But just so you're aware of what's happening down there. This system does a few things. First off, just because you're near the bottom of the standings, your games can still be extremely important. They still count because you're not trying to win the league anymore, but now you're trying to literally stay in the league. And the higher the league you're in, the higher the check you get from TV contracts. So it's kind of a big deal.
Okay, so that does make sense right there. It makes sense that teams would not be incentivized to be really bad like they are in basketball, because tanking is a real thing.
It also creates this kind of theoretical meritocracy where you could start a team with a bunch of guys anywhere in the country, get into a kind of a tiny league, and then ultimately work your way up to the Premier League. In reality, that'd be like trying to take a single-A baseball team and work your way up to the majors, while the other better teams with bigger pocketbooks are trying to buy all your best players the whole way. But for the teams at the top, just winning the Premier League sounds pretty easy. You're playing maybe one game a week. But that's the catch. There's other things going on here. So there's also the Carabao Cup, which is a tournament open to the top 4 leagues in England. And then there's the FA Cup, which has been going on since like forever, that it's literally open to every team in England. So over 700 teams entered this one tournament last year. Like, imagine if every major and minor league baseball team had one giant tournament. So could any team win? Yes, they could. Will the small teams upset the bigger teams? At some point, maybe a few will. But is it likely that a non-Premier League team is going to win? No, probably not. So more fun to think about in theory than practically, I guess. The final tournament is the big one. Like, what if we could find the best team in Europe? And I don't mean like each country gets a team. That's the European Championship that happens every 4 years. This, I'm talking about the league clubs. So the best teams from...
Okay, so it's my understanding that the European Championship thing that he just mentioned runs in sort of a stagger with the World Cup, where every 2 years you get one or the other. Let me know if I'm wrong about that in the comments.
From all over Europe, from 55 different countries, battle it out each year. This is the UEFA Champions League. So as a side note on these acronyms here, FIFA is the organization that runs like big international tournaments like the World Cup, and they help to coordinate things across different regions. If you're an American, you probably heard of FIFA because somebody on SportsCenter mentioned somebody that was involved with some kind of corruption investigation or something. Anyway, within FIFA...
I heard about FIFA from the video game.
The world is divided into 6 different regions. UEFA is Europe, that's where like the best players go. CONCACAF, you may have heard of because that's what the U.S. is in, the Confederation of North, Central American, and Caribbean Association Football, which is short and sweet. And then there's like the rest of the world. And each one of these groups has tournaments with national teams and their league clubs, like the CONCACAF Champions League and the UEFA Champions League. And these are called like the Champions League, but really it's just a tournament. So the UEFA Champions League is played in conjunction with the UEFA Europa League, which is kind of like the NCAA and NIT basketball tournaments, but with a bit of a twist. They play the qualifying rounds for the Champions League first. So if you get knocked out of the big boy tournament, but you finish high enough, you can just move down into the Europa League and try to win that. And I won't get into the qualifying, but typically you're going to have teams that you may have heard of as an American, like Manchester City, Liverpool, Manchester United, Tottenham Hotspur. From Spain, they'd probably be Barcelona and Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid. Serie A from Italy will have Juventus and Inter and Roma and Atalanta. Germany is pretty much dominated by Borussia Dortmund and Bayern Munich. And then there's other popular teams like Paris Saint-Germain from France and Lyon from France and Ajax from the Netherlands. And then you throw in a few Russian teams.
Okay, you can't just diss Feyenoord like that. Or PSV. I think those are good teams, right? I'm pretty sure. I know Feyenoord and Ajax are really big rivals, but I don't really know which one is historically better.
And you're ready to party. So back to the Premier League. You remember how your team's playing that kind of standard 38-game schedule. So now, also at the same time, you're competing in the Premier League, the Carabao Cup, the FA Cup, and the Champions League. And there's like a bunch of other small one-off games happening too. So even if you have the best team, you're still probably not going to win all these tournaments just because of the wear and tear. If you can win 3 trophies in a year, that's like special. That's called a treble. If you win 4, that's called a quadruple, but that's pretty rare. And so the biggest payday is for winning your league, although I, for some reason, find the Champions League is hard to beat for excitement. So even though you can, soccer teams tend to trade players less than...
Something that I'm curious about, let's say, for example, you're a fan of Real Madrid. And let's say Real Madrid gets eliminated in the Champions League, but Barcelona doesn't. Do you then root for Barcelona? Or do you root for anyone but Barcelona? Who do you root for when your team goes out? I've always wondered that because it seems like fandom in soccer, I don't know if it's like this in other places, but at least in European soccer, is on an entirely different level. People have not just a bias for the team, but for the city that it's in and the politics surrounding it, things of that nature. So I don't think that the Real Madrid fans would root for Barcelona, but who would they root for in that case? Do you just stop watching? I mean, I know that for basketball fans, usually whenever your team gets knocked out of the playoffs, if they make it at all, you find another team to root for. Or maybe you root for the team that just beat your team. But I guess it's not the same because the premise of your fandom is different. Let me know in the comments.
They do in the U.S. Rather, teams will just buy players from their current club. So a contract is going to include your salary, obviously, but also something called a release clause, which is a fee that would go to the current club for that player. So while any team could negotiate a transfer fee with a player's current club, a release clause takes that current team just out of negotiations altogether. So a baseball player, unhappy with the situation, he could demand a trade, and they might trade him and he'd be happy. But if they refuse to trade him, then he's kind of stuck. Whereas a soccer player could just find another team willing to pay that release clause. And once a team agrees to pay the clause, then they can just negotiate directly with that player. Obviously, the better player, the higher the fee is going to be, so the current club can go out and find a reasonable replacement. Another big difference is that while most sports in the U.S. have a trade deadline, and that's followed by a few weeks afterward where players cannot move to another team, soccer's kind of the opposite. So most of the time, you cannot move to another team. There are 2 periods a year called transfer windows that you can move during. So usually before and then halfway through the season. And you can sign a new contract for another team whenever, but you can't actually start playing for them until that next transfer window. And the last thing in terms of contracts is that in the U.S., most leagues have a draft, but soccer's pretty much like the Wild West. So teams will sign players, or I should say kids, like into their youth academy very young, like 10, 8 years old. And smaller teams who...
10 or 8 years old. So I've always wondered this as well. For someone who joins one of those youth academies, which I didn't know it was that young. I thought they came in at 12 or 13 years old. What happens in terms of school? Do they just completely abandon it, or do they drop out? Do they do online school? I mean, for someone with the talent of, let's say, Mbappe, I mean, let's be realistic. He's not going to be an accountant. So what's the point of staying in school if you know from age 12 that you're going to be one of the best football players in the world? Or maybe it backfires and some people have that sort of trajectory and they don't actually reach it. I'm sure that does happen. We just don't hear about it because they didn't reach it. So what happens to those people? Do they just go back to living a normal life, or how does that work?
Find a really good player could also include something called a sell-on clause when selling a player to a larger team that says if the team buying that player turns around and sells the player again to an even bigger club, then that original team will get a percentage of that secondary sale. All right, so if you're still here at this point, you probably want more. So what's next? There are like an unlimited number of top or best goal compilations on YouTube, which are kind of interesting in the sense that you can actually show, new people to soccer, the potential that the game has. Lots of Americans' exposure to soccer is like the Women's World Cup, and obviously we have a great team there, but you never really get to see what different strategies look like. Like, look up Barcelona tiki-taka videos. You won't regret that.
I think it's funny because I mentioned earlier it was a girl that kicked that ball that knocked the wind out of me. I do feel like in the U.S., soccer does have somewhat of a subliminal perception of being a women's sport. Now, I don't know why that's the case, because as I found out in 6th grade, I'll get to that story in a second, soccer is a contact sport. Maybe not in the same way that hand egg is, but you can get hit Okay, I was in 6th grade, that same year that Josue was on the pitch just mixing me and killing my soccer dreams. There was this kid named Carlos who we were just outside playing soccer, having a fun little game. This man came over and slide tackled me. Nobody told me that this was a thing. So I'm like, why is this man trying to take my knees out from under me like that? So in the locker room, I was like, bro, what was that all about? And I'm not gonna lie, Carlos was one of those kids. He got held back, I think 2 times, not just once. So this man was probably 13 or 14 and I was 11, and he pressed me and I folded. I'm not gonna lie, he punked me that day and I did not want that smoke. But that's how I found out that soccer is actually a contact sport. So I guess it's because the women's national team is just a lot better than the men's. I don't really follow the Olympics like that in general, or the World Cup, or whatever the case may be. I don't know all of these different classifications and tournaments, but I do know that the women's team for the US is better than the men's. Let's get to the real stuff, okay? Let's get to the actual nitty-gritty of this. In basketball, we have the Jordan and LeBron debate. That's the big thing. That's the talking point that all of the major networks always come back to because it generates a lot of controversy. And truthfully, in my opinion, it is a valid debate worth having. In soccer, you have the Messi and Ronaldo debate. Or, I guess to some people, Messi, Ronaldo, Pele, and Maradona debate. Who do you think is the greatest soccer player and why?